and qualifications and able to answer questions. So again, it's the Eastern District of the county, District number 1, that's being represented for the candidates for County Commissioner. So Mark Ozias and Jim McEntire are here. We had a flip of the coin. Mark is going to do the introductory 5-minute presentation, then Jim will follow up, then we'll have questions. So please be starting to think of questions, and then they'll each have 3 minutes at the end. And I will, as I told him, elbow them aside if I think that they're going on too long. So Mark, welcome, please.
Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. I don't know many of you, so I'm going to take just a couple minutes and tell you a little bit about my background. I have 2 primary career arcs. The first is in the nonprofit world. The other is as a small business owner. As a nonprofit leader, I've been engaged in a variety of activities, all related to leadership. I was recruited by Virginia Mason Health System as a director of planned giving at age 26. I was a leading and early member of a group called Social Venture Partners, which attempted to take some of the tenets of venture capitalism and apply them to philanthropy. And I've been the director of 2 nonprofit organizations here since we moved to the peninsula almost 12 years ago. As a former small business owner, I understand the power and the potential that small business brings to a community. And as county commissioner, one of my most important areas of focus is to work to diversify and strengthen the local economy. And I think that the way to do that is through the power of small business. Over the last 10 years, 100% of new net job growth has come from new businesses. And it is the unique independent businesses that are the backbone of our economy and who are the future of Clallam County's economy. But today we're here in Olympic Medical Center, and I'd like to talk about something that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about in the campaign so far, and that's the subject of community health. Community health is the number 2 strategic priority of the county, and it's an area where, unfortunately, leadership has been severely lacking. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation does an assessment of a county-by-county assessment for the whole country that ranks counties in their level of community health. And they look at things like physical environment, social and economic factors, health behaviors, access to clinical care, etc. Over the last 4 years, I'm sorry to say that Clallam County has slipped from number 19 to number 27 in Washington State, and that's a real problem. What we're seeing is adult obesity is worse than it was 4 years ago. The number of uninsured people in Clallam County is worse than it was 4 years ago. Number of children living in poverty, worse than it was 4 years ago. Air pollution, worse than it was 4 years ago. Folks, slipping to number 27 from number 19 in only 4 years is out to be looked at as a crisis. Though public safety is the number 1 priority of the county, but community health is the number 2 priority. And frankly, there has not been nearly sufficient focus placed on that issue, and I hope to talk about that more today. I'd also like to talk briefly about the budget. It's budget time, and I have some concerns. This year, in order to balance the budget, at least the preliminary budget as it stands now, required the transfer of $2.7 million approximately from our county reserves. Now, that does balance the budget, but that also leaves our reserves very close to their minimum level. And I don't believe that that is a successful financial policy for the county's future. During the recession, we had to transfer approximately $1.2 million from the reserves every year for 3 years to balance the budget, because that was an emergency situation. And we're going to be leaving ourselves with no margin for error. And And if you think of reserves as sort of the county's family savings account, I don't think that it's good or conservative financial policy to balance the budget by making such a large transfer and expecting that things are just going to be okay from here on out. So I hope we get the chance to talk about some of those things today. I'm thrilled to be running against Mr. McEntire. I'm thrilled to be here in front of you, and I hope during the course of the day to earn your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Jim, 5 minutes. I hope I will not prove that, let's see if we can make this thing stick there. I hope I will not prove that I am not a morning person. I'm about 3/4 of the way caffeinated right now. I belong to what I affectionately know as the Crack of Dawn Club down in Squim, but I'm only about a 1/4 mile away from Sunland, so I can sleep until the last minute, get up, throw my clothes on, and make the meeting. Happy to be here. Thank you very much for your invitation. I won't go into a lot of biographical information because I think most of you know my background, my history. I will say that I've had 46 years of public service, all but the first 4 years in leadership positions, leadership roles, both in the military, in the federal civil service, and lately for the last 8 years in elective office here locally. I am very proud of that record of public service. As I had a career-defining moment back in the 60s when I was a junior in high school. I spent a summer shoveling out chicken houses in the hot Georgia summer, and that was it cleared up a lot for me about what I did not want to do for the rest of my life. So I ultimately joined the Coast Guard, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that was my last exposure to the private sector. But 3 commands at sea and several very senior positions in the federal civil service have given me an awful lot of experience and exposure to risk, reward, and how to make good decisions. And so I have, I think, had a very good record, one that I'm proud of and one that I'm happy to run on for the last 8 years in public office, of understanding how it is that you need to craft good policy, how it is that you need to persuade other people to your point of view, and how it is that you need to be persuaded by other people to their point of view when they've got a better idea than you do. And I think my history here lately shows that. The main thing that, as you know, that I have been pressing for the last 8 years is to try to find ways to get behind our local economy and push just as hard as we can. Economic growth, healthy economic growth, solves an awful lot of public issues, and of course brings in increasing amounts of revenue for local governments. All of the many taxing districts that we have here in Washington State. This state has the most fragmented system of local government that I've ever experienced in all my moves around the country. That's neither good nor bad. It just means that we have locally here a challenge that we need to meet, to have a conversation amongst all of ourselves to make sure that we're well coordinated, we understand what the right and the left hands are doing, and that kind of thing. So the economy is a team effort. It's not up to one part of government. It's not even up to government to create an economy and have an economy that flourishes. Government, of course, has a role in that, in infrastructure, regulatory posture, and fiscal policy, which I hope to talk a little bit more about. And
But the latest example of how that thing can work together is the 2 grants from the Opportunity Fund that you've read about in the newspaper for both the city and the Port of Port Angeles. That's cooperation at its best. We had some ups and downs and bumps in the road, but we finally got that done, and that's a good thing for our region and for our economy. And the last thing I want to mention is I was able to get elected by 21 timber counties to represent them on the State Board of Natural Resources. We have a tremendous timber base here in our county, private, federal, and state. The Board of Natural Resources manages state timberlands from which are derived jobs and revenue to local taxing districts. Not just to county government, but to fire district. Anybody that has a property tax levy, including common schools, gets a proportionate share of revenue from the harvest on county lands that were transferred to the state back in the day for management of the timber harvest over time from those lands. And so I hope to garner 3 additional votes on the Board of Natural Resources to get our harvest where it needs to be and keep it there. I look forward to your questions. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
We're going to start with Mark answering the first one, then we'll flip back and forth between the 2 of them, then you can kind of slide up to the microphone. So who has the first question for the 2 candidates? Grant?
What's your thoughts, each of you, on the DNR timber arrearage issue, and what would you do about it?
The question is, what are our thoughts on the DNR arrearage issue and what would we do about it? That's clearly an important issue for the county, and it's a tough one. And the reality is that we can try and do something about it, but it's, at best, that's a long-term and a partial solution. And my opponent has a seat on the committee that he just referenced, and you know what, he's always looking for 3 more votes. And the committee recently came out with its first series of recommendations, and none of them were very good. I think the danger in focusing on arrearage and working through arrearage as the only solution to this problem is we're sort of losing sight of the big picture. And my opinion is that if we want to put pressure on the DNR, a better way to do that would be to pull together representatives from all of the junior taxing districts and approach the DNR in a coordinated effort to try and put pressure on them. This is an approach that's been suggested by some of our private foresters. I think it's a great idea. I think that's an excellent way to put pressure on the DNR. But if we only focus on arrearage as the key to our county's future, to the key to our economy, then again, we're missing sight of the big picture. And what we ought to be talking about and pouring resources into is what's next? How do we look at timber and creating a value-added product so that we're exporting something that might actually make money? What other kinds of industry do we want to look at attracting? So it is important to focus on working through arrearage. It's important for all of our junior taxing districts, but I'm not convinced that the way that we're approaching it right now is actually achieving results. So I would handle it differently.
For mill closures tends to focus the mind, and it shows the fact that we have, and this is not just Clallam County, this is all of the timber counties, the collective, we have kind of taken our eye off the ball as far as the vital role that a natural resource economy plays in a county like Clallam. And of course, that's not the whole story, but it's an important part of the story and can be again. And so the Board of Natural Resources is working its way through the arrearage. There's some interesting proposals from some constituency groups to manage how you dispose of the arrearage earlier rather than later. And that is the key question facing the board right now. And I rather think that I can get 3 additional votes. I know of 2 already. I'm just working on the 3rd. And as you know, you can do anything you want if you have a majority, anything you want that's within the law. If you have a majority, you can't do anything if you don't have a majority. And so that is the way that government works, not only at the local level, but the state level. And to exemplify the importance of disposing of the arrearage, the fire district in Forks is running a property tax levy right now for the first time ever, because they have not been able to keep up with the expenses that they need to keep up with, which have been funded by timber harvest revenue in the past. So they have to go to the taxpayers now out in Forks to make up for the fact that the timber cut is not where it needs to be and where it was planned to be originally. So very important, not the whole story by any means, but you know, Clallam County's one of the real advantages that we enjoy is a great natural resources base, both for tourism and for jobs in the woods and revenue and that kind of thing. So it's really important for Clallam County to be well represented in Olympia on those questions.
Thank you. Jim will go first, and next one, John?
Could you explain the 3 top revenue streams into the port and the 3 top expenditure areas from the
Board or the county?
county?
County. Jim can answer that. He can tell you if I get it right. The 3 top revenue streams are sales taxes, property taxes, and the grants in all different flavors that come to us from both the federal government and the state government. My opponent referenced public health. Public health is funded largely through the grant mechanism and not from locally derived tax revenues, except for mental health. So the three top expenditure levels are, the main expenditure level is law and justice, because that's a very people-intense endeavor. And that is the reason why you have a government in the first place. There are much smaller expenditures. I'm speaking of the general fund now. Roads, which is another fundamental function of government, funded in a separate property tax levy, and gas taxes and so on and so forth is the next biggest expenditure. And then there's a whole bunch of other smaller components of government. So they're really just the top 2, law and justice in all of its different aspects, jail, sheriff, courts, juvenile services, et cetera, and so forth, and roads. That's the main job of the county government. And then there are a bunch of other things that are necessary, elections, for instance, that the county government does for all of our local governments.
Mark?
Well, I don't know that I need to review the top 3 income streams, but I might point out that the county's other most significant expenditure is on personnel and on salary, and that's important because when we're looking at the budget and we're looking at the next couple of years, we're looking at built-in increases in cost of living, other contractual obligations, and that is going to those are considered structural expenses. It's not, they're non-negotiable expenses. They're contractual expenses, and when we are looking at a future where we're going to be challenged for revenue, where we're not going to have any extra funds in reserves, like to balance the budget next year, that's something that we need to be paying close attention to now. And again, that's an area of the budget where we don't have a lot of ability to control the increases that will be coming until it's time to renegotiate contracts.
Thank you. Another question? Laurel? Mark will go first on this one.
Both of you have referenced the economy in relationship to the arrearage question, as was pointed find out there's a lot more to economic concerns in our talk about the role you see the county playing in specific economic initiatives.
Sure. Well, this is a fun one because since our very first forum, I've been talking about the county's role as being one, in essence, of coordinating. And early on, my opponent said it's not the county's role to coordinate the economy, and I believe that he may have changed his tune based on his opening statement today. But the way I see it, there are numerous organizations and entities throughout the county that have economic development as a portion of their mission. Of course, for the port, that's the primary function of their mission. The EDC, that's their primary function. But the tribes have an interest in economic development. The city of Port Angeles, chambers of commerce, the WSU extension, and others. And I believe that the county's role as the entity or the agency with the most broad scope is to make sure that all of the organizations who are working on economic development and are working on improving the economy, Peninsula College would be another important example of an institution that ought to fit in that group. The county's job is to make sure that all of these organizations are communicating and make sure, to the extent possible, that they're moving in the same direction. And this county doesn't have a history of communication like that. This is something that we see over and over again across many industries. And what I have found in my work as a director of the food bank, when I have pulled together a coalition of organizations to address a subject, a group of people who should have been communicating but never have, there's a palpable sense of relief. Like, thank goodness, we're finally talking to each other. How come this never happened? And you know, it's not part of the job description of a county commissioner to do that, but I think most of the important work that county commissioners do is often beyond the job description. And reaching out and ensuring, to the extent possible, that all of these entities are communicating and moving ahead together and in a complementary fashion is one of the most important things that we can do.
Jeff? I've got 3 minutes, right? Okay. I'm going to try to talk fast. Probably can't. There's a very fundamental philosophical difference between myself and my opponent regarding this topic, this question. Let me talk first of all about the three major things that county government in particular, but any government to a certain extent does as regards economic things economic. Number one, regulatory posture. The county has a very light regulatory posture, except for land use for businesses that exist in unincorporated areas. That's good. That's appropriate. Second thing is fiscal policy, and this gets back to the budget discussion. I believe it best and smartest to take as little money as consistent with effective government from private individuals in the county through taxes, and leave as much money and choice as possible in the hands of private citizens. It is not intelligent fiscal policy to tax and then leave money in the bank idle when inflation is running at 1.7%, and the interest income off of idle cash is 0.9%. That's 0.8% of value leakage, if you would, economic dry rot. That's not intelligent fiscal policy. The third thing is that county governments in particular do, cities as well, is land use policy. We need a very wise and thoughtful, comprehensive plan to ensure that there's sufficient land for forestry, industry, commerce, residential development, so on and so forth in the county. We'll have that discussion next year when the county's comprehensive plan comes up for review. But the major difference is, and the last point I'll make is that's why I was so strong on the EDC and keeping the EDC going and functional, because the EDC, if it's composed largely of private sector individuals, can inform government better than government can inform itself about how things need to work better and in a more coordinated, complementary fashion in the county. That was the main reason why I spent so much political capital trying to get the EDC to survive and then thrive, because we need in government to hear things that we might not ordinarily want to hear from our citizens who are having that conversation amongst themselves. Informally, of course, we can, as individual elected officials, we can talk to our constituents, but we need to hear that from a county-wide organization such as the EDC, not to the exclusion of all the other organizations.
Thank you, Jim. Next question? Yes, Mira?
Mark, you mentioned community health. As commissioner, how would you improve the community, actual community health?
How would we improve community health? Well, first I would observe that health of each individual is a fundamentally private decision. Government's role in public health or community health is to try to fill gaps that exist. I referred to mental health, what is known colloquially as the Hargrove tax. Mental health is a ongoing problem and issue in our community. That is appropriate to be handled, I think, in some aspect in a major way by government, because a lot of times someone's ability to hold a job is connected to their mental well-being. And if they can't hold a job, they can't come up with their own personal resources to manage their own health. That's an example of how government can play a role in community health. But fundamentally, health is an individual responsibility and an individual choice. Government needs to facilitate that, but not control it. The other role that is unique to government is research and information. We have all heard in our grade school days about the food pyramid, and the Department of Agriculture says you need to eat certain quantities of this kind of food versus that kind of food. So giving good information to people so that they can make their own individual choices is a research and informational role of government. But government needs to look at the whole population and not try to dictate and drive what individuals do for themselves and for their families. So this again is another illustration of the fundamental difference in philosophical outlook between myself and my opponent.
Well, I certainly don't recall saying that it is the government's job to control people's health. I don't believe that. Health is always an individual choice. But the reality is that as a community, we've got health problems, and there are a variety of ways that we ought to be addressing those. And that ranges from working to support our school bonds and levies so that OMC can be more effective in attracting new physicians, to helping to facilitate community-wide collaborative efforts to address specific problems like the heroin problem that is currently troubling so many individuals and causing problems for so many business owners and putting such a stress on community health resources. My personal belief, and this is certainly grounded in my work the last few years as the director of the Sequim Food Bank, is that food itself is one of the keys to community health. We are what we eat, and the people, somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 county residents used a food bank last year. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's over 70,000 different meals altogether, because many people have to use a food bank more than once. That that were necessary last year. And that only captures about somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the actual need. And I want to say 7 out of our top 12 health problems, our chronic health issues, are directly related to food and directly related to our diet. So if there is one thing that we can do as a community to improve our community health, it's focusing resources on the people who need the most help. The people who come to food banks who are food insecure are the same people who lack access to sufficient health care. They're the same people struggling with chronic illness. They're unemployed. They don't have access to resources. So to the extent that we can work to focus the efforts of all of the organizations that are out there working on their own, I don't think that the county government or any government should necessarily be supporting food banks, for example. However, they play a very important role in the county, and with a little bit of support, a little bit of coordination, perhaps more direct coordination with the Department of Health and Human Services, I think that we might be able to leverage the good work that organizations like that are already doing and really get a lot more bang for our buck, so to speak.
Thank you. One last question, then we'll have closing from both of them. John, let's see if anybody else is jumping up for a first question. Nope. All right, you get the last question.
We have a heroin problem in the county. Why is that, and how would you propose to correct it?
Well, I don't know that I have the answers for why. I believe that the heroin problem here in the county and across the country generally stems from the problem of prescription narcotic painkillers. That's the gateway drug to heroin, and if you talk to young people around the county, in fact, we learned this from one of our young employees at the Red Rooster Grocery, who had seen many of her friends fall to this problem, and was explaining to us how it happened. Now, that's how it happens, but the question is, what are we going to do about it? And it requires an all-hands-on-deck approach, because it is a difficult problem. And there are numerous. The good news is that there are numerous organizations that have an interest in solving the problem. Schools have an interest in solving the problem. The tribes have an interest in solving the problem. Downtown Business Association has an interest in solving the problem. The Medical Center has an interest in solving the problem. Department of Health and Human Services has an interest in solving the problem. The deal is, none of them are talking to each other. It's just like everything else. So my approach would be to work with all of the entities that have a stake in the outcome, that are working independently on crafting some community-wide solutions and making sure that that effort is moving forward. I actually like the language that my opponent uses when he says, get behind the economy and push. I don't think that he's been successful in that regard, but when we're talking about community health, I think that the county needs to get behind all of these entities that are working at this common problem, make sure they're communicating, and push a solution forward. And that's how I would propose to handle it.
A couple of thoughts. First is, I have a personal theory that the drug problem that we have seen that seems to be kind of endemic stems in a big way from the lack of hope for a better future, hope for a successful personal life, hope for a successful family environment. There are some things that government can do in that regard to help that market basket of issues, and certain things that government cannot do. So it was very, very good for me to see recently that a grassroots community effort has gotten gotten off the ground and is beginning to really attack the problem from a citizen standpoint here in Port Angeles. Would that were to happen in Sequim as well, because this is a problem, excuse me, that's not specific to Port Angeles, Forks, or Sequim. This is every place. As a matter of fact, on KONP this morning, as I was driving in, trying to keep my eyes on the road and listen at the same time, you know, I occasionally can walk and chew gum at the same time. Heard a news report about this private organization, grassroots effort, and Health and Human Services and the county government working together. So that is happening. Things work best when they start from the bottom up. Government can facilitate, government has a role, but it can't replace the determination and the organization that citizens themselves come up with. So two aspects. Number one is to help facilitate the community's effort to improve itself, and number two, to do anything and everything to provide a better economic situation, or at least enable a better economic situation, so that people can see a prospect for themselves to take care of themselves, to have an adequate income, to be able to support themselves and their families, and that kind of thing. That's how hope is derived in a community in large measure, in my view. So those two aspects are the important things to focus on, and I'm delighted to see the latest development here in Port Angeles. Good for you, Port Angeles.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have a closing based upon the flip of the coin at the outset. Jim will have 3 minutes for a closing, and then Mark, and then hopefully they will stick around if you have questions that didn't get answered. You'll be able to have the opportunity to do that with them. So, Jim, thanks. 3 minutes.
Once again, I stand on my record. I have a great record of community service in elected office. I have a great record of engaging with my constituents, no matter where they are, either in Sequim, Port Angeles, or Forks, or all places in between. I'm convinced that it doesn't rain in Forks, because every time I go out there, it's a beautiful day. And it just happens that way, it seems. But the main thing that I have to recommend myself is not only my record in office, but the 46 years of servanthood to my country. I am proud to have served my country for that period of time, and I look forward to another 4 years should I be honored to have the citizens of our county return me to office. I ask for your support. I think we're on a good path in county government now with a Republican majority for the first time in 15 years. Things are different in terms of the political makeup and the outlook, and I think that's for the better for our citizens and for our economy in particular. So I ask for your vote. Thank you very much for your kind invitation to come and wake up with you this morning. And I look forward to engaging with you after we formally close the meeting. Appreciate it.
Mark?
Thank you all again for the chance to be here. So my opponent's record is the reason why I'm running for office. As I started out talking about, when we look at community health, the record for the last 4 years is not one of success. It's one of failure. When we look at the economy over the last 4 years, Clallam County has dragged behind the state and the country in almost every regard. So I don't see that enough is being done. And I believe I can make a difference because I'm a different style of leader. I have different priorities. And my priority as a leader is to engage citizens in their own government. That's something that we are discouraged from doing at every level of government. Anyone who's ever attended a public meeting has witnessed the same thing that I have, whether it's City Council or the Board of County Commissioners or any other. whatever the issue at hand is, you know, someone's taken time off of work, let's say it's a Board of Commissioners meeting. Those happen at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. So that in and of itself makes it very difficult for when somebody does. They get up, you know, they've taken time off work, they've done their research, they have an opinion that they want to share. By the time they sit down and listen to the discussion of the counselors or of the commissioners, they pretty quickly realize that the decision was made well before they ever even came to the meeting, because very little attention is paid. It is not common practice to weigh and discuss the things that people bring up at meetings, even if the decision ends up going the same way. People we as leaders and as commissioners owe it to citizens to listen to what they have to say and to take that into consideration. So I very much am committed to re-engaging citizens in their government, and that requires outreach, that requires commitment. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that another way to look at leadership is how do leaders translate values into action? Our county's values are collaboration, accountability, cooperation, partnership with industry, customer service. And I will, of course, everyone ought to judge for themselves now that you've got your ballots in the mail, whether our county leaders have been doing an adequate job living up to those values, turning those values into reality. As an experienced leader of nonprofit organizations, that's the way that I think. That's what you do when you lead a nonprofit organization, is you take those values and you find creative ways to turn them into action on the ground. So as county commissioner, that is my pledge to you, or that will be my pledge to you. Again, I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and I hope I've earned your vote. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for coming this morning. Again, I hope you'll hang around for people to ask questions. Turn it back to Mark.